What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr., John Morantz, Joe Johnson's, Jaw Raps, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
You know, just out here. Feast week in and of itself is always a interesting scheduling proposition with so many games and so much going on. And then you just throw a World Cup in there, group stage nonetheless. So you've got 4 games a day in 4 different time slots. It is quite a time to be a soccer and college basketball fan this week.
Yeah, I'm sure you're pretty busy. I'm basking in the fact that I'm going to spend exactly 90 minutes watching the U.S. play Wales this afternoon, and then I'm going to forget about it regardless of who wins or loses. It's going to be fantastic, and I'm going to do that with the 50 total games across. I mean, no, I guess it's more than that. The 100 total games following that, up until we have a winner of the World Cup. It's fantastic. I can't wait. It's not all that often I get to do that. So I am, I wish you the best of luck in the next, specifically the next week, but by extension, when is the gold medal game? The gold medal match? Sorry.
The 18th, I believe.
Gotcha. Is that the correct
18th, I believe?
Gold medal match? Is that correct? Is that the correct terminology? The world title, like
World Cup final. I call it the World Cup final.
Okay. All right.
There are gold medals that get handed out. I just saved that for the Olympics and just call it World Cup final.
Fair enough. As much as I'm sure you're chomping at the bit here, we're going to talk college basketball first, okay? And then we're going to stop recording before we talk about the World Cup, so I'm very, very sorry. But just a normal run-through stuff pod today. We'll start with winners and losers and then kind of bounce around to some of the bigger games of the week, a multi-team event, an MTE in Las Vegas that had plenty of interesting things to talk about as a result of the final scores there. And then we'll get out of here. We'll get well on our way to Feast Week. That's really already underway, but kind of as we that is already on its way, but we'll get good and ready for it. But it's Monday, winners and losers every Monday. Teams that put themselves in good positions, teams that maybe did not do that so much. Sometimes it's a player, sometimes it's a conference. Most of the time it's just a single team, but we take some liberty when it comes to that. But we will start where we always do on a Monday with winners and losers. Josh, who is your winner?
I'm going to give you the distinction of going first this week.
You're going to give me the distinction of going first this week? Okay. My winner is Virginia, because I'm not sure that there is in the spirit of the description of winners and losers, it's hard to find a team who did what Virginia did this week out at the main event in Las Vegas. First of all, the big, huge Vegas chips on the sideline, on the baselines, I could probably do without those. They're super loud. Other than that, whatever, it's fine. But Virginia, they get 2 wins to win that event. They beat Baylor, and then they go on to beat Illinois. And right in and of itself, that's a really impressive week. The thing that impresses me the most is they won one of these games scoring 86 points, and they won one of these games holding the other team to 61. And we have this conversation every single year when it comes to Virginia, because that's just what we kind of do. And the first thing they did is against Illinois, they reminded us that it is an elite defensive program at its core. Terrence Shannon Jr. has quietly been like one of the 3 or 4 best players in college basketball so far this season. He had, in his first 4 games, had 3 games of 24 points or more. And against UCLA had 29, got to the free throw line a bunch of times, and against Virginia, he had 9 points, was 4 of 10 from the floor, and was 0 of 2 from the free throw line. And that a lot of that credit goes to Reese Beekman, goes to just that Virginia defensive ability in general. And then the night before, Baylor's guards were really good. They were 54 points combined, and apart from a brief run, like kind of in the middle, like they never really got within arm's reach of Virginia the entire second half, even when it felt like Baylor started to pick it up offensively. Virginia just kept making shots. Armand Franklin was spectacular. What in the world? Where did that come? Like 26 points. They were 25 of 45 from the field as a team against Baylor. They were 9 of 14 from deep, went to the free throw line 35 times. I'll save a couple things I have about Baylor for a little bit later in the podcast when we're not in the winners and losers portion of the pod today. But Virginia got 2 spectacular wins. They're up to, top 7 at KenPom. One, Carolina's 7th or 4th, and Virginia's 7th or 4th. I don't remember off the top of my head. One moment. It is Virginia who is 5th. Sorry, it's Virginia who is 5th. So I was just wrong in a gajillion different ways, but they are 5th and up to 4th in offensive efficiency at the moment. So really impressed by them. Tony Bennett is back in a big way, and we haven't gotten to conference play yet, and he's made sure to remind people of that. So Virginia, my winner for the results purely. And then when you dive a little bit deeper into how they won those games, it's early, of course, but that's a pretty good spot to prove that you can win games in multiple different ways against teams with elite talent.
And not only did Virginia do all of the things you just laid out, and I want to reinforce some of those because that was my takeaway from a Virginia perspective too. They did this after what that university has just been through.
Right.
Which is yet another testament to what I will continue to harp on about Tony Bennett, which is you can feel however you want about the way he builds his program, the fact he hasn't really embraced the transfer portal, the fact that, he's not getting one and dones, the fact that their offense isn't always pretty. But from a culture standpoint, from a mental toughness, resiliency standpoint, from a identity standpoint, what he has built is remarkable. And it's a testament that, right, this is the program that could come back from losing as a number 1 seed to win a national championship. This is a program that just won a MTE with 3 really, really good teams. And then the 4th being them, another really, really good team after an incredibly difficult week or so for everybody associated with that university. That's the other part of this I wanted to mention too, is not only on the floor, but the fact that they were able to do what they did on the floor with everything else that mentally they're still trying to process and grieve. Mm-hmm. And you hit the point I wanted to make, which was just the versatility of these wins. Right. They shot the lights out against Baylor. Baylor had sort of the run that set the possibility for a run that would have gotten them back in the game, but that second run never came. Mm-hmm. So they just sort of stayed within striking distance for a while, but it was the 3-point line. And then you go to the Illinois game where you still score 70 points, even though you're 5 of 17 from 3, because you get to the free throw line 32 times, you hit 25 of them. You only allow Illinois to get to the free throw line 9 times. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden you're in this situation where Virginia looks every bit as good as we both thought they were going to be, and already going to that NCAA tournament conversation, they're scoring 70-plus points against really good teams already. And maybe the defense isn't exactly where you want it yet, but they still did some really good things defensively. And if they're scoring 75 points instead of 64, they are all of a sudden, at least a top 10 team in the country, if not top 5.
As of right now, they're projected to win more games than anybody else in the ACC this year. And that includes Duke and North Carolina.
That doesn't stun me.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we talked about that at the beginning of the season. The question is never with Virginia, can they put enough games together in ACC play? The past couple of years, it's just been a clear and striking talent difference between that program and some of the other programs in the conference. And they still find ways to win a ton of conference games most years, right? I mean, they went 13-4 2 years ago in conference. They won 12 last year in conference, despite being 72nd in adjusted offensive efficiency. I mean, sorry, in just efficiency as a team last year. So when they have a team that is talented and performs at a high level relative to the rest of the country, I'm pretty confident in their abilities to win high level ACC games and force North Carolina or Duke to win a ton of conference games to actually take that regular season title, which is exactly what we talked about.
The conversation, yes, the conversation is, can they have enough offensively and be elite defensively, put those two together to be a national title contender? That's where I'm at. The rest of the questions have already been answered. It's how high is their ceiling? They're already ACC title contenders. Maybe they don't win the conference, but exactly like you just said, they're going to make somebody beat them.
Who's your winner?
My winner, I went a little bit sort of out of left field, but I went with Arizona State.
Okay.
Arizona State got a 4-point win over VCU and then a 25-point win over Michigan to win the Legends Classic following the loss to Texas Southern. Now, they just couldn't miss against Michigan and held Michigan to 33% shooting from the field. I was even texting you as I was watching this game that nothing about that looks sustainable to me. It was what happens when Bobby Hurley's guards all of a sudden have a really good day and you just can't guard them because they all turn into elite shot makers for 40 minutes. But still, to just blow Michigan out of the gym like that, it gets you back into a position where you're, I would argue, almost coming out ahead of where you should be at this point in the season. If, you get a win over VCU, but you lose this game to Michigan and you beat Texas Southern like you should. To me, and especially the way the committee works, I philosophically disagree with this, but those key wins, those marquee wins, almost hold more sway than bad losses. And the other part of this for me, from an NCAA tournament perspective, is just not letting this thing spiral and actually stopping the bleeding and then getting back into a spot where you've got a lot of confidence and you feel much better because of look what you just did to a good Michigan team. And so I don't know. I'm not convinced this is going to be the turnaround for Arizona State, and Arizona State all of a sudden is going to surprise people and finish fourth in the Pac-12 and easily make the NCAA tournament. But had this Legends Classic gone poorly, that could have been the end right then and there. And instead, they came away with a couple of good wins. They looked really good doing it for the most part, especially against Michigan. So if they're able to turn this into something, this is going to be one of the things you look back on as kind of a turning point in their season. So it's one of those kind of, it's getting late early situations, and they kept the sun up a little bit while longer, if you will.
I think I'm more interested in the next 2 weeks than I am in the fact that they beat Michigan, right? I'm like, because you've laid the foundation, like at least assuming Michigan stays in the top 25 for the remainder of the season, or at least is bouncing in and out, and hopefully you get to a point where they're like firmly in by the time you get to the end of the season. And then at the very least, you can start your non-conference conversation with, well, we beat Hunter Dickinson in Michigan. But, right, they've already lost to Texas Southern. They probably should have lost to Tarleton State. They play Grambling and Alcorn State coming up next. Grambling is already a team that's beaten another team in the Pac-12 already, right? They are going to play a bad SMU team. They're going to play San Diego. They're going to play San Francisco. They do have an opportunity to get another good win against Creighton, but which, right, like you said, I'm not exactly betting on them to ever replicate what they did against Michigan a single time this season. But for me, right, to your point, they kept the sun up by getting a win that nobody expected them to get, and a win that will, as long as things go the way that we're expecting them to go in Ann Arbor, will be a good win by the time we get to the end of the regular season. I'm interested in Bobby Hurley coaching this team to no more massive mistakes in non-conference, right? That's the next step here, is to take that win that nobody was expecting you to get and a 15-point win. Like those, like that's an important fact. Like the fact that they just, regardless of how they did it, the fact that they jumped on him early and controlled it throughout and won by 15, like that is not an unimportant part of the victory. But if you can get through non-conference without another loss to the effective Texas Southern, then this win against Michigan starts to get even more important, because you aren't just trying to cancel out bad non-conference losses with the one good non-conference win that you got. I mean, Texas Southern has already gotten smoked by Texas Tech and San Francisco.
It was a 25-point victory, 87-62.
Oh, my bad.
Just wanted to
even more. My apologies.
No, I mean math is right. Just to back your point up, yeah.
So, yeah, 87.
But it's gonna look very good on the metrics from every. Yeah, it's gonna look good on the metrics from every kind of measurable angle. But you got it right. You got to keep it going. This is sort of stopping the bleeding, but you got to actually address the larger issue.
Real quick, my honorable mention winner is Charleston for finally winning the Charleston Classic this weekend, beating Virginia Tech in the process, getting a couple other respectable wins while doing so. They won kind of in the final seconds. And I would also just run through a brick wall for Pat Kelsey, and I wanted to say that. So Charleston's my honorable mention. There you go. There you have it.
I like it. That thought did cross my mind of making them my winner, so I'm glad you got it in there.
And they didn't. I mean, they beat Davidson and Colorado State, and I'm not even sure was the Davidson win a part of that event. I don't even know for sure. But it's not like they beat another big team to get there. It was a part of it. So good for you. Good for you, Charleston. But it didn't quite get the marquee win that would have pushed it over into the winners circle, especially with what Virginia did this week. But I wanted to mention them. Just 5-1. They finally win that event. First time in program history they've actually won it. And that's good for Pat Kelsey's team, and it was fun to see them do it in front of a home crowd. Who is your loser?
Yeah, my loser is Kentucky. So we can save some. Actually, you should do your loser first, because
right.
That way I'm not going back to back.
Right. Yes. My apologies. My loser. My loser is the teams in the ACC not named North Carolina and Virginia. It was an absolutely atrocious week for teams not named North Carolina and Virginia. And it's not like North Carolina did something all that spectacular. They just beat the teams they were supposed to beat. Here's who the ACC lost to this week. Are you ready? Let's go on. Buckle up, because it's quite the ride. Just on Sunday, Miami lost to Maryland by 18. Wake Forest lost to Loyola Marymount. Virginia Tech lost to Charleston. And Tarleton beat Boston College by 16. Those all happened on Sunday. That was only Sunday. And it wasn't that much better earlier in the week. Florida State lost to Florida and is 0-4 now. We'll get to what they did earlier in the week one moment. Pittsburgh lost to VCU. Duke lost to Kansas, which is fine. But it happened. Louisville lost to App State. Syracuse lost to Colgate to the Toothpaste by 12. Boston College lost to Maine by 5. Florida State lost to Troy. And they are 5th in KenPom ratings. They're 5th. And much closer to the Pac-12 at 6 than they are to the Big East at 4. And, Josh, they have 3 teams in the top 16. Virginia, Duke, and North, and they got 2 teams in the top 9. And they're still that bad at KenPom, right? They have the preseason number 1 team. They have perhaps the most impressive team thus far, at least the past week. And, like, it is, they had multiple atrocious nights when it came to the rest of the ACC. So they're my loser. The rest of the ACC. Pick it up, please.
Yeah, and for a conference that was trying to repair its image this season, right, and try and show that it's not just the top, even if the top is 3 teams this season instead of 1 or 2, depending on how you felt about last season. The whole point was the depth behind those 3 teams. And so far, that depth has really not been there. And, you can look at some of the Pac-12 struggles. The SEC hasn't been all that impressive. And you got the ACC too, and there's just seems to be this very clear sort of, and I mean, the Big East has been pretty good. So the ACC's got work to do to get back into that upper tier of conferences, even if you're not talking about the ACC being the best conference in the country, just getting back somewhere into that conversation and turning the page from last season. That has not happened so far.
Not at all. Who's your loser?
My loser is Kentucky. Not just because of the Gonzaga loss and how it looked, but also just sort of what it means moving forward. We don't have to get into a whole conversation about all of the stuff we dove into with the Michigan State loss, but it was a lot of the same themes. CJ Frederick had 3 points in 36 minutes. Key players were in foul trouble. That became an issue because you don't have the ability to replace them when Sabri Wheeler's not playing particularly well. Antonio Reeves is, again, inefficient. You need Sheboy. And you need Case and Wallace to stay on the floor. And so now you've lost. And again, not that Kentucky was necessarily supposed to win this game. I'm going to take Gonzaga at home against probably every team in the country. And home being, the general vicinity of where Gonzaga's campus is. But now, all of a sudden, I was looking forward at Kentucky's schedule. And to sort of rewrite this narrative before conference play, you've got a Michigan game and you got a UCLA game. And if you don't look good in those, you're really banking on the rest of the SEC stepping up. Tennessee already has stumbled. Arkansas hasn't had a real test yet, but isn't necessarily blowing people out of the water. You're relying on the rest of your conference to kind of lift you up if you're Kentucky trying to get back into this 1 and 2 seed conversation. You got to win an awful lot of SEC games if this takes a while to get figured out, because it's a lot of the themes you identified. The role players aren't giving you enough. Sheboy is perhaps the most important player in the country, even though you and I both don't think it needs to be that way. And so now you had 2 marquee matchups. You lost both of them. It's not a Sheboy working himself back into, game shape situation. That's not the issue. He's been really good. It's everything else around him that was the big question mark coming into the season.
I want to see them play. I would love to see them play a high major team without Oscar Sheboy, because I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, there's part of me that's like, okay, yeah, sure, their guys shot well against bad basketball teams, and there's the other part of me, and the part that I can't shake, that there's another consistency between them shooting well and them not shooting well, and that's Oscar Sheboy. Now, we don't know if just the differences in that team when he's on the floor are the reasons they're shooting poorly, or if it's the fact that they're playing teams that actually have the personnel to play high-level defense. We don't know that, and we'll probably never know that. But all I know is that Frederick and Reeves were horrible again in this game. I mean, those 2 guys, along with Severe Wheeler, were 9 of 28 from the field. And the other part of this is that, it seems like Calipari has no interest in making this team anything other than an Oscar Sheboy dominated team. He just looks like he's gotten outclassed on the sideline 2 games in a row. And I've proudly been on I'm not sure John Calipari is that good of a X's and O's college basketball coach anymore, because he makes it clear that that's not really what he's all that interested in at Kentucky. But if you ask me to rank who I think are the best coaches in college basketball, I would have gotten to Tom Izzo and Mark Few far before I got to John Calipari. So that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but it doesn't seem like they're doing all that much to try and get these guys out of the slump. It's just kind of, well, Casey Wallace is good. Well, Oscar Tshiebwe is good. Let's hope that Oscar Tshiebwe can stand under the basket enough times in a game, in a sport that it lives and dies on the 3-pointer. Let's just hand it to the guy who shoots layups all day. I don't really know how to feel about Kentucky with Oscar Tshiebwe and Kentucky about, playing high major opponents, right? And we went from one thing to the other with Kentucky pretty fast, right? I mean, now all of a sudden it's a resume that has nothing especially impressive to hang its hat on. And we're for a long time going to be questioning how good this team is relative to the other teams in the country when they go toe to toe. And like that, it's not like this game was close. They lost by 16. And the one thing you can't let Gonzaga do is get out and run. And guess what Michigan State and Texas didn't let them do? Get out and run. And yep. Texas embarrassed them, and Michigan State almost beat them. And if Mady Sissoko doesn't foul out, they might beat them, right? And Kentucky, not only did they not do that, they didn't seem all that interested in doing it. And Calipari didn't seem all that interested in realizing it and trying to put a stop to it. It was a pretty striking performance there. And it's weird. Like, part of me is like, can we back off the edge when it comes to Gonzaga now? And the other part of me is like, should we get a little bit closer to the edge when it comes to Kentucky?
Yeah. Which team does it say more about? And the other thing I'll throw in there to the point you just made, it's confusing to me how the team built around Oscar Tshiebwe was the team that couldn't control tempo. Mm-hmm. Michigan State wants to play fast. Texas doesn't necessarily play fast, but Texas at least has some guys who are dangerous in transition, right? Texas is not taking 10 seconds to go establish a guy in the post and then feed him the ball 5 straight possessions. Kentucky inherently, the way they play offense is slow because it's built around Oscar Tshiebwe. Oscar Tshiebwe is not a transition-based player. And so the fact that you couldn't even turn that into being able to control Gonzaga's transition when other teams who don't have that were able to is a big concern.
Agreed. Yeah, I don't have a ton else on Kentucky. If you have anything else you want to talk about.
No, I want to say one thing about Gonzaga, and yeah, I feel like the game and the scoreline pretty much speaks for itself. But one of the things we hadn't been seeing from Gonzaga was that secondary scoring. Anton Watson and Julian Strother, Rasir Bolton showed up big time in this game. Partially because it was more suited to their style of play, as you pointed out. So that's a real positive. And to the conversation about how am I supposed to feel about Gonzaga, those guards still worry me. And that was
been pretty bad, actually.
That just from a production standpoint, you're not getting what you need from them. So to me, this was more about, I came to the conclusion this was more about Kentucky than Gonzaga, but important for Gonzaga to sort of get back into a little bit more of a convincing rhythm and kind of find themselves for what feels like the first time this season.
I mean, if those 3 guys are going to score 20 points, I mean, you could send me out there to play point guard.
Right, they're going to be able to hang with anybody. Yeah,
but at some point, whether it's Nolan Hickman or Hunter Salas, somebody's got to take that position by the balls and be the guy, right? Because it just, I mean, Hickman seems to be the guy, right? Hickman is the guy that Mark Few seems to have more confidence in. I mean, Salas only played 10 minutes in this game. Hickman played 28. But, right, I mean, 4 points, 4 fouls, 2 assists, and 2 turnovers, right? That's not good enough. And against a team where, in theory, and I watched bits and pieces of this game, and then when it got uncompetitive, I stopped watching. But in theory, the game where there's a 5'9" guy in the backcourt, like in theory, that should be the game that you have a chance to at least cultivate a little confidence on offense. If nothing else, you have no visual, no issue seeing above the defense, right? And making plays. But yeah, that is the biggest question mark for Gonzaga, and it's been a long time since that's been the question mark for Gonzaga, right? We went from Nigel Williams-Goss to Jalen Suggs and I know there was some time in between there, but we went from Nigel Williams-Goss to Joel Ayayi to Jalen Suggs to Andrew Nembhard. Like that's been the progression, right? Like that is
Kevin Pangos before that.
Yeah, Kevin Pangos before that.
Jeremy Pargo.
Was John Stockton's kid Arizona or Gonzaga? I think it was Gonzaga, right?
I do believe so. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's this is not an issue that Gonzaga has normally, and it's not like the other guys on this team are not playmakers. They're just, I mean, they are playmakers, but not for others primarily. Mm-hmm. And so somebody's got to be that, or that's going to be a very, very big hole in Gonzaga's personnel moving forward. Anything else on either of these teams?
No, that was really all I had. We kind of hammered it to death on Thursday, I feel like. And it's just reinforcing the same things for the most part in this game. So
agreed. I've got one more thing to talk about, and it all centers around Baylor. Do you have things from that event in general?
Yeah, let's go to Baylor next.
Okay. The biggest takeaway from Baylor is that Baylor is not a great defensive team this year. They started the season 12th in defensive efficiency. It's November 21st. They're already 43rd. They're 193rd in defensive effective field goal percentage. They're horrible at keeping the other team off the foul line. I mentioned that in the Baylor game, that Virginia went to the foul line 35 times. That's too many times. They're 254th in three-point field goal defense. Outside the top 150 in two-point field goal defense. There's a lot to like about this team offensively. There's not a ton to like about this team defensively right now. And, it kind of has me. I mean, they needed 80 points to beat UCLA by 5. And UCLA has plenty of firepower. I mean, that's fine, right? But there hasn't been a ton of, Baylor is clamping down on this team tonight. There hasn't been any of, wow, Baylor clamped down on that team tonight. And we'll see. Well, hopefully it gets better, but it's been pretty bad early in the season. And like, with all due respect, the team outside the top 350 in tempo, like, they should never put 86 points on you. Never, ever, ever. Right. And even though they were efficient from the 3-point line, they only made 9 of them. It's not like they made 17 of them. Mm-hmm. They need to get better on that side of the floor. That's the biggest takeaway from the main event for me. And the numbers back it up in terms of their performance on that end of the floor so far this year.
Yeah, I feel like there was about a 5-minute stretch when they kind of got back into the game against Virginia where you saw some really good things defensively, and then it just disappeared again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I have 2 big concerns for Baylor, and that is one of them. Yeah, that was one of the questions coming in, right? That I think people glossed over is this team doesn't have that versatile 6'8", 6'9" guy, at least that we've seen so far, that can guard 1 through 5 the way Mark Vital and Jeremy Sohan could. There is such a value into the switchability of the way they play defense. And so far, and maybe, if and when Chamo Chanchua comes back, maybe that helps a little bit, but he's also not switching 1 through 5. The guy next to him is supposed to be the one switching 1 through 5. And so that to me is a real concern that needs to, and, most of the guys who are in that potential role, this is their first year in the program, whether they're transfers or freshmen or whatever. So it could be by the time we get to January, they look much better in that regard and found that guy. But there is a real ceiling. I'm in love with what their ceiling could be. there's also a real ceiling on what they can get to if they don't fix these defensive problems. And then the other thing is, I mean, the guards have been really good, and Conte George had a really good game against Virginia. He didn't have a good game at all against UCLA, but LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler had two of the best games of their careers. The backcourt is doing what the backcourt is supposed to do. Somebody's got to produce something from the front court, particularly the starters. You're getting a little bit from the bench here or there, but that's the other part of this. They don't need to be scoring 15 points a game, but it needs to be a little bit more balanced than it is on offense as well.
Jalen Bridges and Flo Thamba had a combined 9 points in those two games.
Right. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yep.
Neither guy had a field goal against UCLA. And then against Virginia, Thamba was 3 of 3, but like Jalen Bridges did not have a field goal in those two games. And that was a part of the conversation, right? When we were talking about how good this team was going to be. And it's not like Caleb Lohner's been the best big on the team, and it hadn't been particularly close. And that's not saying a ton because the bench hasn't been all that spectacular either. Because it's been the front court in the starting lineup that's underperformed. And we talked, and Kendall in the preseason talked about yes, those three guards are awesome, but like we've got two other guys on the offensive in the backcourt that are coming off the bench that are also good. I mean, Dale Bonner and Langston Love combined for 4 points against Virginia. They were a little better in the UCLA game, but like only Dale Bonner, and that's because he went to the free throw line 7 times. He and Langston Love played 4 minutes, and Bonner was 1 of 3 from the field. So there's this kind of mismatch thing going on, and inconsistencies from at least one part of both the front court and the back court. And the guards have been really good. The starting backcourt has been really good, so it's masked some of those things. But if you're not going to play defense well, and you're going to get, to win a national championships this year, you're going to have to go through elite front courts, right? Like that is going to be the case, and Chama Chachua will help with that. But if you're getting outscored, if you're getting outscored by 30 in the front court, like if you go play Gonzaga and Anton Watson and Drew Timme have 41 combined, and you guys have 7, it doesn't matter how good the guards are. Because when you go to Gonzaga's guards, you also got Julian Strother and Rasir Bolton and all of the dangerous players they have on the perimeter, right? They're pretty unbalanced right now from a production standpoint, and that and their defense, it's got to get better because teams don't win national championships when they're built like that. They just don't.
Yeah, it's interesting that Virginia, I feel like, has become the team that Baylor usually is, where you kind of look up a couple weeks in, you go, oh, and Baylor is a different kind of yeah. And so this is a different kind of project for Scott Drew. It's not managing expectations and not trying to keep going after your 11-0 start or whatever. We got some problems that need to be addressed. You have time. They're in a perfectly fine situation with a very good loss. It's not like it's all falling apart, but for this team to get where this team can get, there's an awful lot that needs to change.
Yep. What else do you have from this event?
I'm feeling pretty good about Illinois. I don't really have anything in particular other than they're looking like I thought they would, and like you thought they would. That they, to me, look like a team that can contend for a Big Ten title. So that's always positive. The other thing I wanted to highlight from a UCLA standpoint, Amari Bailey had 6 points, 2 of 10 from the field in these 2 games at the main event.
Was he even worse in the first game? I hadn't gone. He had 5 points against Baylor. Was he was even worse in the first game? I hadn't gone back.
Unless I somehow horribly misread the stats. Yeah, it was.
You're right. 1 point, 0 of 5 from the field. Yeah.
That is. I thought that was an interesting discussion point in terms of him and what this year is going to look like for him, that you come up against these really, really good teams. And that's, again, it's, 5 games or whatever into his college career. Certainly this could look different by the NCAA tournament, but that part of it individually. And then also, as we talked about, these freshmen need to be really good for UCLA.
Bono wasn't much better either. 7 points. 7 points across the 2 games.
to me, they were just they weren't that much worse than everybody else, but they were just the fourth best team in a tournament that had 4 of the top, 15 to 20 teams in the country, which is what makes these tournaments so awesome. Is you just got 4 really good games, no matter who won and who lost.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody has to end up 0-2 at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the team that kind of had, you could argue Baylor has more to figure out, but Baylor also has perhaps the best trio of guards in the country.
Mm-hmm.
UCLA doesn't, has very good players, obviously, with Jaime Jaquez, etc., but doesn't have quite as much of a cushion as Baylor does. Virginia was the best team in this tournament, and Illinois' got plenty of weapons as well. So I just feel like UCLA, credit to them for showing up, and it's not like they got blown out or anything, but if they're going to, it goes to that conversation we were having of can they actually contend with the best teams in the country? You need more from your freshmen. You need more from Amari Bailey in particular for that to happen.
Yep. They're just, it's not a good enough team if those guys aren't good. Right. It's just not, it's not like them. We beat this horse half to death, that it's not good enough for them to just be okay and for them to spend 17 games really getting into the rhythm. If they're elite the last 10 games of the season and carry that into the tournament, then great. You play in the Pac-12, lucky you. You can probably survive that and still get a really good seed in the NCAA tournament. But you'd like to start from a better place when you get a chance to play high-end talent than what you got in these 2 games.
Yeah.
And also, just as an aside for UCLA, apparently the crowd at this event on the West Coast with 3 other teams that don't play basketball on the West Coast, UCLA's fan base was the worst of the 4. It was just, the fan base was just non-existent, which I find super strange. And maybe it's just it's a midweek tournament and it takes a gajillion years to get out of LA anyways. So maybe it's just not worth it. Maybe there just aren't that many UCLA fans in Vegas. That could be it. But I was surprised to see and there are things that are peculiar, and then there are things that get multiple people in the building to tweet about them. Mm-hmm. And there were multiple people tweeting about how bad the UCLA fan base was. And that one's interesting to me. So I don't know. I'm sure Poly Pavilion will be packed when they play in Pac-12 games in Poly Pavilion. I'm not really all that worried about it. I was just, I at one point this week had the thought of, oh yeah, UCLA out there on the West Coast, and maybe they have a semi home court advantage, right? You see on KenPom that the location was semi home or semi away or whatever. Thought that could be a semi home environment for them, and apparently it was not. Yeah,
just tough all around. Plenty of time to turn things around, but I wanted to point that out from a UCLA standpoint.
Am I correct in assuming that you've just got? Do you want to talk about Houston? Is there anything else we need to talk about?
No, I just want to say one thing about this Houston-Oregon game.
Okay, real quick. Houston beat Oregon 66-56. They're 5-0. It's hard to argue that they're not that there's anybody in the country better than they are right now. What would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, so qualify this by saying Oregon's backcourt is really banged up right now. I think they were down to 7 scholarship players by the end of this game. It was 7 or 8 or something like that. And we're playing, 2 7-footers out there at the same time because they didn't have the. Oregon needs to get healthy before we actually know how good Oregon can be. That being said, Marcus Sasser just kind of sat on the bench the entire first half because he got in foul trouble. And when Marcus Sasser went and sat on the bench, Marcus Sasser didn't come off the bench because Marcus Sasser didn't need to leave the bench because Terrence Arsenault and Jarris Walker were outstanding. Arsenault in particular was the best player on the floor in the first half. And then Jamal Shed, who has the ability to go score when he needs to, but then doesn't when Marcus Sasser's on the floor as a true point guard who understands his role on the team, chipped in with his points as well. And all of a sudden, Oregon did kind of lock in defensively, make a run. You saw Houston get stagnant offensively, which can happen sometimes with this team. They still handled things just fine by the end. But especially in that first half, they built and maintained that lead in large part without Marcus Sasser. And I just wanted to point that out, that Marcus Sasser is one of the best guards in the country. He's probably going to be an All-American. it is not like he is carrying this team by any stretch of the imagination. He just happens to be option 1A on this team with plenty of other options. And these freshmen who kind of flew under the radar because everybody was talking about their teammates. This is one of the best recruiting classes in the country. And these guys showed you why against Oregon when Marcus Sasser was in foul trouble. And to have the ability to just say, you know what, we don't need to push it. You've got 2 fouls. You just take your time and come out in the second half ready to go, because we are more than capable of playing without you, is a tremendous weapon in a world where so many teams have looked iffy and we've identified flaws of some of these top teams in the country. That is a real positive for Houston that has already shown itself that these freshmen are ready to go and ready to contribute.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. They went into Oregon, didn't play great, played okay. Marcus Sasser was in foul trouble. They won 66-56, and you never really felt like the game was in question. That's what, I mean, you know, there's almost more to be said about, I mean, they were, you know, they knocked down 50% of their 3 points. Like, it was a good game. They shot, but they, you know, it's 42% from the field. As a team, it was a fine performance, and you felt like it was never in question. And when you look back at the teams that go deep in March and into early April, there's a lot of, that, you know, they just kind of handled business. Never really felt like Oregon had a chance to truly threaten, and they didn't really do anything all that spectacular. But they got a win, and they looked relatively comfortable doing it, even when their best player was 5th on the team in minutes because he was in a little bit of foul trouble.
Mm-hmm. They did get they got owned on the boards a little bit because of Oregon's size, but that's just because of Oregon's size. I'm not worried about Houston's rebounding ability. Yeah, they were just exactly what you expect. Well-oiled machine.
And just to kind of cap off the conversation about Houston, right? North Carolina has had their awkward games, right? They get pushed by UNC Wilmington. They give up 86 points to Charleston. You're right, Gonzaga, Kentucky. We can talk about all of them. This is the per game results for Houston though thus far. 83-36 over Northern Colorado, 81-55 over St. Joseph's, 83-45 over Oral Roberts, 83-48 over Texas Southern, and 66-56 over Oregon. I mean, they are cruising. They're doing exactly what we thought they were going to do, and they have done nothing but solidify anybody's stance as them being a Final Four and national title contender, taking care of business in a season where thus far not a ton of teams have taken care of business. And granted, they don't have the game against another top 5 opponent, right? They don't have that game yet. Oregon is a team that already has a stinker of a loss on their resume, right? So all of those things are worthy of being pointed out, but there are also teams at the top of the sport that struggled with bad teams in the ways that you wouldn't like them to. And Houston has done the complete opposite of that. Just kind of put them in a 45-point box while they score 85 and move on with their lives.
That's right.
You got anything else?
We will be back with one of my favorite podcasts of the year, Feast Week Winners and Losers, Monday. No Thursday pod. Go eat turkey. Go eat stuffing. Mashed taters. Green bean casserole. That's what I'm doing. I'm not talking to you guys on Thursday. Sorry, with all due respect. But yes, we will be taking the Thursday off for Thanksgiving, and that's typically what we end up doing. So we'll come back next week, at the beginning of next week, to kind of recap Feast Week. It's typically in the fashion of winners and losers of Feast Week, and that manages to get us around most of the sport and most of the big tournaments in exotic places with big name teams playing in them. That tends to get us pretty close to where we need to be and paint a nice picture of Feast Week. So that's what we'll do at the beginning of next week. Please have a happy Thanksgiving or happy holidays. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, you're kind of missing out, but just eat turkey, whether it's just eat stuffing.
even though that's probably like, is that like 4th and 5th on the Thanksgiving power rankings? Like all the sides are first, right?
See, I'm a big turkey guy.
Are you a big turkey guy? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like we've kind of situated ourselves into this place where turkey is like really hated on. It's like, it's just a dry meat. You got to put gravy on it to be good. Well, then put gravy on it. Put mashed potatoes on it. Stick it in between 2 rolls, and have yourself a day. And then come back with 3 more pounds on your stomach, and we'll talk college hoops on Monday. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, YouTube, TikTok, all of those fun things. Just search Jays for Days podcast. And like I said, we'll be back on Monday. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.